Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of the Scannell Agenda. This is Saturday, April 14th, 2018, and the title of the show today is Red River to Point Gammon. Rev it up. Now, this has to do with what I call pick your own strawberries in fishery management. And let's see, where am I here? Okay, now, there's a lot of money in the cranberry business. Here's my cranberry juice here. And I've used an analogy in the past about the eelgrass being analogous to the cranberry vines. See, the bay scallop is the fruit of the vine of the eelgrass. So if we plant eelgrass and then we play our cards right with introduction of a broad stalk, let's say from Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket and some other places, if we can get some good broad genetic stock to go with, this is so vital. And I think this has been a failing of the Red River fishery. Not that there is such a thing, but over the years there's been some bay scallops there, and they peter out, and they're trying to come back, and so forth. Now there's some scallop beds in Harwich, Dennis, and Yarmouth. Of note, I would say, in Lewis Bay, but they're very, very insignificant as far as fisheries go. So, what would be our strategy if Cape Cod, New England, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, Montauk, New York, these are all the bay scallop areas. So what would be our strategy regionally for bringing back the bay scallops? So I would say it would be just like bringing back the striped bass. So you have habitat, you have aquaculture, water quality, WQ, and then you have fishery management. Okay, those are the 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's your first thing to do if you want to rebuild the bay scallop fishery. We have to have a game plan. That is a different thing than saying, as the public is often saying, well, what do the fishermen want to do? This is more of a public works, aquaculture, fishery management project, and less of a, well, what do the fishermen want to do type thing. Okay, now look, if it's do we fish on Saturday or not? Okay, then you say, what do the fishermen want to do? And we had this on Nantucket. And I remember as a young fisherman, I was opposed to stopping fishing on Saturday. And then a bunch of fishermen talked to me and said, why are you opposing this? This is what we all want to do. And I thought about it. I said, you're right. I'm sorry I opposed you, and there's no good reason for doing that. On an issue like this, whether you fish Saturdays or not. I remember later on, too, Steve Bender on Nantucket came up with the idea because the fishery was up against the wall. So we had this plan to fish for 4 days and take 4 boxes instead of the 5 bushels, 5 boxes of scallops. So that would be a 40% decrease in the landings per week. So these are types of things which are appropriate to say to the fishermen, what do you want to do? But however now, as a country, we're importing a lot of foreign seafood. So it's inappropriate to take something like this, pick your own strawberries or sea farm or market quota system proposal project, and then say, well, how do the fishermen feel about this? Well, it's not appropriate to do that because the fishermen are simple people. We are simple people. We are hunter-gatherers. We're not inclined to be cultivators. And I've gone through all this. Now, if you had a vineyard, you wouldn't say to the grape pickers, okay, how do you feel about these management judgments that we're making here? You wouldn't do that to the grape pickers. Well, we're doing things to the fishermen that we shouldn't do to the fishermen. Simple people, fishermen, hunter-gatherers, foragers. Now, if you go up the food chain, you get to the cultivators. You get to people that run the hatcheries, that are involved with your fishery on a biological level. Now, if you were to put it to these people, how do you increase our biomass tonnage? How do we increase bay scallops? How do we increase the eelgrass? Because if we know there's money in eelgrass, then eelgrass is kind of like a cranberry bog that produces every year. Every year we're out there bay scalloping. And this is how it was for decades and decades. Okay, if that's the case, then we're remiss in ignoring our opportunity to plant eelgrass and then reap the rewards of these scallops. Now, I just want to tell you a little story. My best day of fishing ever in my life was on the Hurricane Emily. I was fishing in the Court of the Bay. I was looking for a windrow, that is, the wind heaps up scallops, and I found it, and I made one tow. I got bogged down, and I thought, oh, geez, what's this? You know, I got bogged down so quick. Actually, the dredges were filling with scallops. This windrow filled up my dredges, such that I got my 5 bushels plus. I had to push scallops overboard, and it was just nothing but beautiful, big, healthy, the healthiest, biggest scallops you'd ever hope to see. And I had the idea that fishermen would be excited about, expanding our scallop grounds on Nantucket to include the Court of the Bay and eelgrass production and cultivation and, the hatchery work that I've done on Nantucket. But no, that didn't happen. So that one day, the reason I say it was my best day, it was my best poundage day because I got 50 pounds. So 50 pounds times, let's say $30 a pound, that's a retail value. And that's not realistic, but I'm just for point of illustration, that's $1,500 in one tow. So that's the extreme, I could tell you about the other end where you pull up your dredges and you get a bunch of mud and junk and everything. So this is the real money crop of Cape Cod here. But now how much would you pay? When you establish a good bed of eelgrass, what you're doing is establishing Mother Nature's finest, let's say, hatchery or nursery for babies of all kinds, baby lobster, baby flounder, you name it. The eelgrass beds are Mother Nature's big, producer. So it's not just bay scallops. I'm not just talking commercial fishing here. I'm talking Mother Nature. This is a wonderful thing for Mother Nature. So for years and years, I've been working on my clipboard, on the clipboard here, with the topic of eelgrass cultivation. That's one of the many topics I work on. That's one of my earliest. And I I did have an article on Nantucket, and some people actually thought that was crazy, you know, to talk about eelgrass. We don't like eelgrass. You know, it gets in the way of scalloping. Some people were actually like anti, you know, eelgrass in some way. Not many, though. I mean, a lot of fishermen knew that, you know, the better the eelgrass beds, the better the scalloping's going to be. So, the issue of taking the seafood for free has to get into the spotlight with the public. Don't say what do the fishermen want to do. Because whether it's mussels, look at this mussel. Whether it's mussels or quahogs, beautiful wampum, or, and I do know the difference, I made a mistake on one of the last shows, sea scallop, wait a minute, what is this? Sea clams, sea scallops, okay. Oysters, you know, beautiful oyster. I held this oyster up, I said, what a fine shell this is. We got this, my wife and I were walking on Cockle Cove Beach, I think, which was from that stock that was getting a foothold off of Red River Beach and off of Chatham right there, South Chatham. So, well, whatever it is, shellfish, fish, kelp, dulse, especially the dulse because you harvest the dulse up in Nova Scotia. I don't know if it's harvested much in Maine, probably is. And then, of course, all your big money species, your sea scallops, your lobster, your codfish was a big money species. We wiped it out. But all these fisheries, and internationally and federally and locally, we need to change our game plan. We need to go with pick your own strawberries. We really do. Now, with the pick your own strawberries as a basic foundation, it's what I call the market quota system, but you can think of it as pick your own strawberries, because what we'll be doing is charging for the poundage. Now that can be a little tricky. How do you do that? Well, there's a lot of nuances in how you charge for poundage. But the seafood comes in anyway, and it's getting landed, it's getting graded, and it's getting sold. So the money to do this, actually, to charge the money per pound, will be rather simple, I think. And you've got your retired folks that are available to be wardens, and you know, you can take photographs as you bring in your fish, and with technology today, it won't be that big of an issue actually doing it. It's like pulling teeth for fishermen to say, we want to do this, because they never will say we want to pay for poundage as we bring in the poundage. Fishermen want to bring in as much money and put it in the bank as possible. Now, the problem is we have kids graduating from high school who can't become fishermen because fishermen are so territorial. Actually, let me just diverge here. Fishermen can be territorial, but rich people can be much worse. On the waterfront, I explained, I had a little story about a lovely couple, the Lovelaces on Nantucket, and they were very neurotic about the beach, and you know, what are you going to do with this boat that washed up, and when's it going to get out? You know, when we can't look at this boat. It's like terrible thing. So the waterfront people are very aesthetically tuned into their view, and that's why I designed a nice upweller, tidal upweller. That means the current powered it. It wasn't powered by pumps. For Nantucket, so people that live on Hulbert Ave, looking out at the channel, which is a perfect place for an upweller, because the tide runs pretty hard in there. I said, we should do this. You know, we should do this because they don't want to look at a plywood, junky-looking raft. You know, it's going to be off-putting. I would agree if I lived on Hulbert Ave. I wouldn't want to look out and see junk. You know, it's different from looking out at a nice Herreshoff design. Ah, beautiful. Yeah, very pleasing. That's what I'm for. So when I'm designing these public aquaculture systems, I'm very keen to be aesthetically aware of what we all, and I don't live on the waterfront, but we all want aesthetics to be right. However, having said that, I think the rich ruined the hatchery on Nantucket. They got in there and they're so paranoid about anything on the waterfront. And the fishermen can be equally nutty about aquaculture. I guess number one, because you don't want to give up territory to the biologists. So that was a problem on Nantucket, and we had this oysters versus scallop, and these were some of our elected officials too. They were against the oyster and for the scallop, and we were trying to maintain a hatchery. We had a deal worked out, or the powers that be had a deal worked out that we would be raising the oysters easy, and that would allow us to run a hatchery that we then could get into the raising of the bay scallops, 10 times as hard as the oyster. So, incidentally, I guess a lot of the fried clams now are the baby sea clams, and they're aquaculture product. Basically, you go to your hatchery, you get your stock and everything. So we have enormous grounds from Red River to Point Gammon. Rev it up here. How are we going to rev it up? What do you mean? What are you talking about? Well, if you develop the cash flow for the eelgrass cultivation, if you can justify because of the cash flow eelgrass cultivation, well then, you have now justified a huge industry for Cape Cod. You can't justify setting up this industry for Cape Cod and for America, essentially, too, without going to this market quota system. Market quota system, value price, as Fred Jennings called it, the Harvard economist. And, you know, it's a sea farm. So how would that be run? There are many different ways of doing it. Just like if you had 20 acres or 10 acres or 5 acres, you could do a pick your own strawberries farm. You could make it pay. And you'd probably have a little, you know, hay rides and whatever else they're doing as well, and make it a tourist attraction. So that's big with me, the tourism and the commercial fishermen, the chocolate and the peanut butter getting together. So what we want to do is maximize the yields from every pound. In other words, if we can do, and this is a shoulder season thing too, October, November, if we can do charter bay scalloping, and people can come with you know, their bushel of scallops if they want to pay the big money, or half bushel or quarter bushel, and they go out and they help pick through the scallops and they have a good time and it's a nice day. A big catamaran can do this on the outside areas. Not Lewis Bay so much. You want to go for the outside grounds. Okay, the pick your own strawberries will maximize your tourism. And that's shoulder season tourism too. So that we can have people come in and they'll bring their scallops in, and then the shanty will be right there, maybe a floating shanty, and they'll walk away with their bag of scallops or frozen scallops, or we can ship the scallops to them, or, you know, it's any number of ways of doing that. But we want to maximize the harvest per pound. Now, the other industry that's being created here, of course, is the cultivation industry, which fishermen like me can participate in. And that's an income for people that need jobs here on Cape Cod. You're not just cultivating seed stock for oysters, sea clams, sea scallops, bay scallops. You know, you're also, you know, this job creation thing is just a big deal. So I would recommend that we look at the commercial cultivation of eelgrass. I've got a lot written up about that. But mainly what we have to be concerned with is the protection of the new eelgrass bed. Once we get it planted, a couple of storms could come in and wreak havoc if we don't do it properly. So I've got these tire reefs that we can set outside, let's say on the main breaking bar out there. And then now you've got, you've got your seas dampened down. And these can be adjusted because you want the waves to wash in and keep things clean too. So this is all adjustable. I had another project I was working on too, and that is the cultivation of eelgrass, let's say 10 to 25 miles southwest of Nantucket. This is on the Nantucket Shoals area. A lot of sand out there, and we could float these eelgrass beds that are eelgrass under cultivation, and we could actually feed these anything from fertilizer to sewage, but I wouldn't recommend the sewage, but it could be done. Nantucket had a sewer pipe for many, many years right into the harbor, straight sewage pipe. And a lot of the Nantucketers said, hey, it was good scalloping, and I don't know what to say about that, but I would recommend closed systems, and my designs are for closed systems for sewage. But you could pull it off with offshore eelgrass beds, which if you're going to go that far, you could also raise tautog, black sea bass, etc. Anything that will get its start in an eelgrass bed, you could easily get that going. See, a hatchery is no big deal, but they got to put the stock. Once you get these little critters hatched, then you got to have something to do with them. And that's where the money really starts to add up. The hatchery is no big deal, but once you get these critters, either you're going to let them go out into the wild, or you're going to cultivate them a little bit and then let them go, probably. And that's where these floating offshore eelgrass beds would come in very handy. Now you'd be using these to bring back eelgrass on the East Coast, and we could have a resurgence of fisheries. Especially since I think what we need to do is do a shutdown of the fisheries, 80% shutdown, not 100%. You shut it down by 80% for 7 years, and then you contribute to your cultivation schemes, if you will, like this Red River to Point Gammon. That's Great Island in Yarmouth. That's before you go around the bend there and get into Hyannis Harbor. Now, this would be good bay scallop ground, definitely. And I think there was a guy named Belding who worked for the state of Massachusetts. He did a report, and it was 1909. It's a famous report among aquaculture people, shellfish people. And he reported that there was a huge opportunity for Harwich with these bay scallops. And I can tell you that, the 50 pounds for 5 boxes was an enormous weight for the scallops. They do much better on the outside than they do, let's say, in Nantucket Harbor. They do much better, generally speaking, outside in these areas that are like outside Dionis. But Tuckernuck and Matticat are the exceptions. The healthiest scallops are over there. And speaking of Matticat scallops, those were the fall spawn scallops. Now the beauty of a fall spawn over a spring or summer spawn is this: with public aquaculture, we can hold the seed, overwinter the seed, protect the seed, and then what you got in the spring is an explosive growth of the animal, the bay scallop, and then it'll be harvested 6 months later. April, May, June, July, August. September, October, like 7 months later, after you're letting them go into the eelgrass. These fall spawn scallops that you raised in a hatchery and you overwintered them. Now you're seeding the beds with these things here. And then 7 months later, there it is. So this here, scallop, is what the Chinese, as I mentioned on shows earlier, this is what they sell us. They harvest the seed, and then they have it shucked out. I don't know how they do it, but they're experts in hatchery of these particular scallops. A guy named Mike Picandra on the vineyard gathered up the stock for the Chinese, and this was all a matter of treaty. He wasn't doing anything wrong. We share seed stock for various things. You know, it's an agricultural thing. So these are what the Chinese raise. So there is some expertise out there for doing all this that we need to get a hold of. I mean, we can do it. Rick Carney on Martha's Vineyard knows how to do all this stuff. But we can always do better. Now, if you gave Rick Carney, he's retired, on Martha's Vineyard Shellfish Group. He's a friend of mine on Facebook, and I've known him for years, going to these little seminars down in Milford, that kind of thing. So you take hatchery people, expert hatchery people, Mook, all these people that can do, you know, Cape Cod, we have our hatchery people over there at ARC, Aquacultural Research Corporation. Now, you give them big hatcheries that they design, floating marine hatcheries, floating marine laboratories, and they will produce boundless amounts of these scallops for the eelgrass beds that we laid down and cultivated. See, that's the ticket. So it's a pick your own strawberries. Now, Red River to Point Gammon, that's Harwich, Dennis, Yarmouth. Matter of fact, I heard that Harwich and Dennis and Yarmouth have just gotten together on sewage projects. So while they're meeting on that, let's get their ear and say, what about eelgrass? And we can let Chatham, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard have a huge shellfish hatchery. Humongous. Let them do that. They've already got these beds, but we want to do, let's say, for this area, Red River to Point Gammon, we want to do the eelgrass because we'll get the scallops. We'll get some scallops down the road. That's not an issue. But the issue is the eelgrass for the future economies. Bass River fishery used to be big. You know, I can't go without mentioning Bass River scallops. Of course not. I'm not ignorant about that. For many years, these scallops were coming in Bass River.